Judy speaking for us now. And I just want to say, firstly, I'm really actually very excited to be introducing Judy. The first time I met you, Judy, was actually at this event, probably about 5 years ago, and you probably don't actually remember when I first met you. And it was one of those occasions where, you know, sometimes when you're not quite sure which session to go to, and you just kind of look in the program and you think, oh, I'll give this a go, Judy Crane, I'll give this a go. And I remember walking into this room, and what struck me first of all was it was a tiny little room, and it was packed. There were people stood around the sides and sitting on the floor, and I thought, okay, this is a good sign. This could be interesting. And then I sat and listened to you for 90 minutes. And it was one of those occasions, Judy, and this is absolutely true, where what you said just made sense to me right from the very start. And I've worked in the substance misuse field for about 12 years, and I've never really kind of understood the relationship between trauma, and particularly early trauma, and the problems that can go on to lead on to. And I've never really understood it until I listened to Judy that day, and I've always remembered it. It was one, you know when you listen to a song and it all makes sense to you, all of us, and it was like that. And I've followed you since then, Judy, and it's a real pleasure to be introducing you this evening. And I'm going to just read out a very short biography for you before we go to your presentation. So Judy Crane has over 3 decades of experience working in both residential and outpatient settings. She is a certified addiction professional in Florida, certified sex addiction therapist, a certified hypnotist, EMDR, and a specialist for healing trauma and PTSD. In 2010, Judy was awarded the Administrator of the Year Annual Award for a significant achievement in the field of addiction treatment administration. She was selected as a 2012 Behavioral Healthcare Champion in recognition of a life-changing therapy, services, and support to Americans who suffer from mental health and substance abuse disorders. It is a tremendous pleasure to welcome you to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Judy Crane.
Can I give you a hug here? David, thank you. Thank you. I think the last time, David, wasn't I in Manchester to speak?
Yes.
God, I did a god-awful job then. I did. I was having kidney stones and not a whole lot was making sense. So it was one of those times when I just kept talking because I knew I had to, but I knew it wasn't good. And I think if Sam's here, she'll remind, she agreed with me at the time that it wasn't good. But in any case, I'm grateful and delighted to see so many people here. It's 6 o'clock. You know, you should be out having dinner and doing something wonderful. But thank you for being here. What do I want to tell you? I want to tell you that I have been coming to London in May for about 8 or 9 years now. It's been my tremendous pleasure to be able to speak at iCAAD quite often. And yet last year I wasn't here, but to be able to come to iCAAD and begin the journey with this particular program, these wonderful people that I've known for some time, it's a real honor, and I appreciate so much the fact that all of you have come from so many different places and are so willing to do this work. One of the things I remind people who work in this field is that I know why you're here. For the most part, we're here because we want to have a life's purpose, and there's something that's happened to us that has set us on this path. If any of you were here because you thought you were going to get wealthy, somebody lied to you. This is the Trauma Heart, and this is the cover of the book that I have finally written. When I was 10 years old, I had dreams of being an author, and it wasn't until just last June that this book finally got published, and it's a really important book for me because it is written with the heart and soul and the blood and the tears of a whole lot of people who've gone through our programs, who have done enormous, incredible work to heal their trauma. Some of the things that you're going to learn as we move along, if you don't know, and I'm assuming that most of you know this, that 90% of all addicts and alcoholics have trauma. And of those 90%, probably another 90% are somewhere in the realm of abandonment, neglect, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. And that's who we are. I know that many of the people sitting in this room are in recovery, and I know that for many of you, that's the reason that you do this work. If you're like me, in 1987, somebody put me on the right path and helped me to find my place. I was incredibly lost, broken, and some of you have heard me say before that I had a really down and dirty story. I was a liar, a cheat, a thief, and a whore, and did not like for 1 minute who I had become, because that's not who I had planned to be when I was a little girl of 10, trying to find a space where I could shine. So this book, the reason that this book is important is it talks about how we have come together, my staff and I, over these many years to learn how to heal trauma and consequently to start intervening on relapse. The next piece of information around this is that relapse is the primary, unresolved trauma is the primary cause of relapse. Unresolved trauma is the primary cause of relapse. When we get to a place where things are being triggered for us again, or those memories are coming back, or the uncomfortability that we don't understand is coming back, when we are so uncomfortable in our own skin we don't know what to do, we have only a couple of choices. And those choices are, we can go crazy. Anybody here done that? Yeah. We can commit suicide, and many of us have attempted that. Or we can relapse. And the truth is, relapse is the sanest option. The fourth option is that we can find a way to walk through our trauma resolution. And that's the path that we've been able to walk. I have a tremendous, wonderful staff who have done this with me for many, many years, and we've developed a program that works, along with some other folks who've done some really good work. Let me see what's here. The important part here is, yes, these are stories of survival, hope, and healing. When I started to write this book, I went on Facebook to our alumni page. I owned another treatment center a while back for 10 years called The Refuge, and I went to that alumni page and I said, because they knew, okay, kids, I'm writing the book now, so anybody who wants to be part of that, please feel free to send me your work, your stories, whatever you want. And I was swamped with those wonderful stories and the artwork, the poems, the tremendous energy that people gave us. And so it's their stories. Although I've written throughout, so much of this work is the work of trauma survivors. And then the other piece is, we're not bad people trying to be good, we're wounded people trying to heal. And the story around that, for me, is very important, because when I got sober, I was 42 years old. Never thought it was going to happen, had no clue about AA and NA, had been popping into detox centers, not knowing what was the next thing to do. And the second treatment center that I went to, I walked in, and initially, my sister took me, and the people in admissions thought she was the client. Because, I don't know about you, but I knew how to clean up pretty well, so, and fake it. And they thought she was the client. But ultimately that night, after I was admitted, someone was telling their story, and it was a woman that was standing up there. When I went into that treatment center, I had incredible secrets that no one ever knew, that I never told, and I thought I would never tell. And I was an addict who had 3 children, all born with different drugs in their systems. My son, who is the most amazing therapist in the world, was my crystal meth baby. And my middle child, my daughter, was a heroin baby, born 7 weeks premature. And she was in an incubator for 7 weeks being detoxed with phenobarbital. And I wasn't able to hold her until those 7 weeks are up. And I can tell you that with good reason, those nurses and doctors did not look kindly on me. My third child was a methadone baby, and that's because when I realized I was pregnant again and I couldn't stop, I immediately ran to the methadone clinic in Philadelphia where I lived. And my sweet daughter is one of the first methadone babies in the United States in the 1970s, and I was one of the first methadone clients. there's a wonderful story around that because there was a doctor, Loretta Finnegan, who wrote the protocol for methadone babies. And Michelle was one of those first children, one of those first babies. And about 10 years ago, she decided she wanted to find Dr. Finnegan and thank her. And she found her through Facebook and email. And she wrote her this amazing letter. I want to tell you who I am. I'm one of your babies. And my mother has created a treatment center here, and I want you to know what it's like for us to be able to do this work with other addicts. And it was a beautiful, beautiful email that she wrote Dr. Finnegan. And then I got to see Dr. Finnegan at a conference so many years later, I don't know, maybe 30 years later, that was a woman who really helped us to put our life together and to kind of clean up the mess that I had made. Anyway, so I was there that night, and this woman, another Loretta, as a matter of fact, was sharing her story, and she started talking. And as you've heard before, I'm sure if you're in 12-step, you've heard that someday you're going to hear your own story. Well, this woman started telling this story about what she had done as a mother and the horrible things that she had done being outside of her own integrity. And she told my story. She told my secrets, and I sat there and I just cried and wailed. And I couldn't believe that somebody was up there talking about that stuff, not afraid to let the rest of the world know that those are the things that she'd done in her addiction. And at the end, she said, "We are not bad people trying to be good. We're sick people trying to heal." And I don't like that word sick because I don't think we're sick. I think we're wounded. And so I've changed that to we are wounded people trying to heal. I didn't get sober that year. I got sober the next year. But her saying that gave me such relief. The possibility that maybe I wasn't an evil person and maybe I wasn't this little Catholic girl that was going to go to hell, and that maybe I could be saved and maybe there was some way out for me. And the next year I got sober, almost exactly the same time a year later. And it was because of that. And I tell you that because if you're like me and you work in this industry, and I'm sure you do, the people who come to us, they come to us with that incredible shame and guilt and remorse. And they come believing with all their heart that there's something wrong with them, that they're evil, that they're bad, and that they're never going to make it to hell or to heaven or wherever they might want to be going. And I hear that. I hear that. When we can, as clinicians and counselors and helpers, when we can help our clients to understand that they are not bad people, that they're incredibly wonderful people who've managed to survive some terrible things, then we are doing the kind of work that we're supposed to do. That's all the first slide. Okay. So when I define trauma is simple and it's complex, it's silent and subtle, and it is loud and ugly. It's sad and lonely. It's an ache that can't be explained. It's a secret that burrows into the soul. It takes a perfectly created being and changes them forever. Our traumas may look the same and yet create very different journeys. And our traumas may be very different and yet create a kindred spirit, a mirror to our pain. Our traumas cause a loss of connection and detachment. Really important to know. Our traumas cause a loss of connection and detachment. When I walk into a room in 12-step recovery, often what I see are an awful lot of lonely people. And that's a result of trauma, and it's a result of what our addiction does to us. So when we're having healing, we have to create connection and attachment. That's one of the bases of healing trauma. Now, I've been doing this a long time, and I know Bessel van der Kolk, and I'm sorry I missed Peter yesterday, and Christine Courtois and Judith Herman, and they are incredibly brilliant about trauma, but they are the first ones to tell you that they don't know about addiction. And there's a real loss there because, again, 90% of all addicts have trauma. Gabor Mate understands that. And so all the work that I've been doing for so very long, I saw him at a conference, U.S. Journal conference, and I'm not a groupie, but I'm a groupie of Gabor's. Because I heard him say exactly what we knew. If people who become severe addicts, as shown by all studies, were for the most part abused children, then we realize that the war on drugs is actually waged against people that were abused from the moment they were born or from an early age on. In other words, we are punishing people for having been abused. That's the first point. The second point is that the research clearly shows that the biggest driver of addictive relapse and addictive behavior is actually stress. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, when he says abuse, that covers a big, wide range of things. That means abandonment, neglect, that means adoption, that means multiple divorces, that means moving many times, that means bullying, that means a myriad of things that are traumatic, and sexual abuse. If you haven't read Dr. Mattei, please do. He's brilliant. Although, I have to make this caveat, all of a sudden he's talking about ayahuasca, and I'm sorry, not a good thing. But ayahuasca, it's a hallucinogen that, it's like LSD, and he seems to think that it can cure opiate addiction. I don't know how you feel about that, but pardon me?
I'm Canadian. I love to work. He does not say that it actually cures it. He says it's part of what could help on somebody's journey of recovery.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. So this is what I think is important. Some of the most comforting words in the universe are "me too." That moment when you find out that your struggle is also someone else's struggle, that you're not alone, and that others have been down the same road. So when we walk into a 12-step room, what's the first thing we hear? You're not alone. Hi, my name is, and I am, and you and I are alike, and all those things that happen for us. There's that commonality. There's that place. I don't know about you, but I have heard people say over the years, over and over again, I felt like I was home. I felt like I belonged. And this is Dr. Fred Rogers. When I was a boy, I would see scary things in the news. My mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. Now, the reason those two things are important is, here you are. Here are the helpers. And the question is why? Why? Why did you get into this field? Tell me your name.
Claire.
Claire, and why did you get into this field?
Because I wanted to help people.
Why?
Because I'm in recovery myself, I was inspired, and
Yeah.
I wanted to grow as well.
Uh-huh. Lori?
Almost the same reasons.
Mhm.
I'm in long-term recovery and I'm just starting this journey.
Yeah.
And I want people to have the gift that was given freely to me
Yeah.
and millions of other people.
Right. So I don't know about any of you, but I've been doing this, like I said, a long time. And the passion doesn't go away for me. It doesn't, wanes, it ebbs a little bit when there are people relapsing. We have an opioid epidemic in the U.S., and that gets overwhelming. But at the same time, I open up my Facebook page, and all of these alumni, I cannot tell you how many of them are going back to school, and how many of them are having babies and in relationships where they never had the idea of what a relationship could look like, and they know now because they've done this work and they understand it. And that power of looking at just having some little bit of input in that person's life, being able to look and say, okay, we come together as a big family, we can help to heal. We can help to heal. I have 5 grandchildren, and we were at downtown Disney in Orlando. I live just above there, and I was wandering the street, and there was this art shop, and in the window was this: if your mind begins to doubt, the lightest gesture of love weighs heavy on the heart. And it grabbed at me because I thought, this is the way our clients feel. There are so many times when I'll come and I'll say, I am so proud of the work you're doing. You're an amazing man. I saw the letter you wrote to your father. You did great work with that. I see how you are with the other clients. I see you building, and I just want you to know that I think you're amazing. And then I say to my clients, what did you just hear me say? And inevitably they will say, you told me that I wasn't good enough and that I wasn't going to measure up to my father. Because we have that trauma ear. We have the trauma ear and the message. The message. So when I saw this in the window, I stopped and I had to buy it. Now, interestingly enough, this is Fabio Napoleoni, who I bought that really inexpensively a few years ago, and now he's popular, so that's good. But the other part of that is there's a story here. There's a story here. So Fabio had parents who abandoned him, and he was raised by his grandfather. And he always thought of himself as a rag doll, and so everything that he paints has some version of these rag dolls in it, and he sees himself that way. But he found art, and it saved him. He was able to tell a story over and over again, which took away a whole lot of the energy around the trauma he was experiencing because he had a place to put it. And then he had a little girl, and when she was just a little baby, she had to have 3 heart surgeries. And so with every piece of art that he does, there are hearts. There are at least 3 hearts in every picture for that reason. Now, I tell you that because this is part of the theme of this particular presentation, is every one of us has a story. And our stories are important and they matter. Every time I get into a taxi or an Uber, I ask, so, where are you from? Why'd you come? What are you doing here? I'm amazed at the stories. If you're not asking those drivers, ask them. You'll be amazed what people have done and what they do in their life and why they're here, how they got here, and what it means to them to be here, because so many of them are coming from other countries. And I don't know if that matters to you, but it matters to me, because those are people who have been through trauma and have, for some reason, a story to tell, and I want to hear it. Did you know that there's a stronger link between childhood trauma and addiction than there is between obesity and diabetes? 2/3 of addicts report being abused as children. That means that the war on drugs is a war on traumatized people that just need help. So what happens when you grow up in a house of trauma? Maybe you're blessed like I am and have the DNA for addiction. I was doomed. I've got that gene, and when it got activated, it saved my life. When I was just a little girl, there was a lot going on in my house, and I was the secret keeper, I was the oldest child, I was the one who was holding things together, I was parentified. Anybody else in this room parentified? Only a couple, really? Yeah? Any secret keepers in here? Anybody holding the secrets for the families? Yeah, okay. Yeah, just a few, all right. For me, what would happen is the secret I was keeping was that I watched my mother having an affair with a man who happened to have a room in our house. And I didn't let anybody else know because I was holding the secret for the family. And then after a little bit, my mother and father started fighting a lot. So, I look back and I think, oh, Daddy must have found out. They were fighting. And he was punching holes in the wall. And they were fighting. And I had 3 sisters, and I had them on the bed, and I was letting them know that it's okay, don't worry, it's going to be all right, I'm going to take care of you. It'll be fine, they'll calm down in a few minutes. Anybody have that experience or something similar? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And then I didn't hear my father for a long time. And I went downstairs, and he had his head in the oven. He was trying to kill himself. I was about 8 or 9. And I pulled him out, and we never talked about it, ever. And I never told anybody until I started doing this and deciding that I needed to be able to share part of those stories. Now, the interesting thing is, so what was I supposed to do? I'm 8 or 9 years old, and I've got this secret, and I'm holding on to these secrets, and I just pulled my father out of the oven, and life in that house is a bit crazy because now we're pretty poor, and I've got 3 sisters, and, life is upside down all the time. And I pull my father out of the oven, and I get him settled, and I run back into the kitchen, and I make myself a sugar sandwich. I put butter on the bread, and add sugar to the sandwich. And I have some of that sugar sandwich, and boy, I get relief and soothing, and I'm okay. And it hits the opiate receptor. And so I'm 8 or 9, and I'm already on the way. I'm already on the way. So anybody have a sugar sandwich or something like a sugar sandwich? So, yes, ma'am. What do you have? Anything?
Anything sweet,
Any-
anything that they
huh?
take away is sugar cinnamon on toast.
Sugar cinnamon on toast. Anybody else? Yes?
Very sweet tea.
Very sweet tea. Now we can branch that out a little bit, and this may distress you, but anybody have early masturbation when they're growing up? 3, 4, 5 years old? Sofa feels good? Don't know what it's about, but I'm getting relief. Anybody self-harm early? You know, start picking at yourself? Relief? Yeah. Does it make sense what I'm saying? Are you distressed at what I'm saying? Okay. Trauma are the life events that impact us in a negative way, changing our perception of ourselves and our place in the world. So when I'm 7 or 8 or 9 years old, I'm already changing who Judy is. Life around me is changing what I believe about myself, because now all of a sudden, instead of being a carefree 5-year-old, which wasn't all that carefree anyway, but being a carefree 5-year-old, now I'm the one who has to make sure that the family's okay and that my sisters are okay and that nobody in the neighborhood knows our secrets, that our house is crazy, and that nobody knows that my mother and father drink every single night and that my mother is the one that gets drunk. All of a sudden, who I am becomes different than who I thought I was, who I was supposed to be. So trauma changes our perception of ourselves and our place in the world. So now I'm not going to be a glamorous movie star. I'm probably going to be a freaking therapist. Trauma creates secret keepers. And that's the reality, because in most families, when people come to us, I've been doing this, like I said, for years, and I cannot tell you how many people come to us and tell their secrets for the very first time. And I don't care how old they are, 18, 28, 35, 85. I have people coming to me at 85 years old telling me that they had been sexually abused by the priest. And they only tell that because their son finally came to treatment and said that he'd been molested by his brother. And Dad finally says, oh, I think I need to tell my story here. So we become secret keepers. Trauma is the incubator for addiction. If some of you, most of you, any of you have the DNA for addiction, in my mind, I think that's a blessing. That gave me a space to be able to have some relief. The alternative was I was going to be a person who was going to be crazy. This way I was just an alcoholic addict. And I make fun of that, but it is what it is. It saved my life. Being able to have something to have relief and soothing saved my life for a long time. Soothing, relief, release, the behaviors that saved us become our addictions. So trauma is visceral, sensory, and cellular. That is really important, because that is what we have to do in terms of the healing process. Trauma is visceral, sensory, and cellular. We smell it, we taste it, we touch it. It becomes part of our intuition. We feel it. I went to meet with the wife of one of our guests, and she's doing some really important work so that she can try and do her part in helping the marriage to heal. And she said to me, Judy, I knew that he'd been sexually abused. I didn't know who. In our phone conversation this past week, he told me who. And I was so sad for him, because it's his cousin, and his cousin eventually died. But the thing that was so distressing to her, and at the same time freeing at the same time, was she said, and he told me, my husband told me, that it was the first time that he was able to tell anybody what it smelled like, what it tasted like, what it felt like to be sexually abused. And at the same time, she was horrified that that had happened to him. the intimacy of him being able to tell her that secret that they had been married for 20 years and she never knew is the power of the healing process. So what we're experiencing is in our body at the cellular level, and it stays there until we find some relief for it, until we find a way to let it go, until we do whatever it takes to be able to have that healing process. And it takes a lot of courage to do that work. It's frightening work. And it is the best, most important thing that you can do for yourself because it gives you freedom on the other side. We experience trauma with all of our senses: taste, touch, sound, sight, smell, and our intuition or our sixth sense. We have what's called cellular memory. There is a blueprint of everything that we've ever experienced in our life is in our body. Everything. Everything we've ever tasted or touched or smelled, everything we've ever experienced is there. It's visceral, sensory, cellular. We cannot, as therapists, talk our clients into healing. We can't. That's not where the healing takes place. It can be part of the process, but we need so much more than that. So one of the things, the most important thing that we do is this. Tell me a story. So I tell therapists this all the time. If you're talking, you're not doing therapy. Therapy is about asking questions and listening and guiding. But if you're talking, and if you're talking about your own stuff, when it has nothing to do with what's going on there, you're not doing therapy. You're not doing therapy. Our job is to be a witness. The most important thing we do is be a witness. And our folks are waiting for us to ask them the right questions so they can start talking to us and telling us. And that's the gift of being a good therapist, of knowing what to ask and when to ask it, how to ask it. And the bigger gift is not being afraid. Not being afraid that when this woman said to me, my husband told me what the penis tasted like. He told me how it smelled. If you're cringing from that, if that would be difficult for you to hear from your client, I'm going to invite you to do some more work around that, because that's what our folks need to be able to say. They need to be able to say their truth and what their truth was without us getting anxious in front of them, because they know. You know. Those of you who are trauma survivors in here, you know. You know when somebody's not comfortable with what you're saying. That's why I'm cautious with you. Now, so I'm going to tell you some stories. This young lady came to us from California, and she is a young Mormon girl, came to us from a therapist who I know and love, and she wasn't a substance abuser. She had done some self-harm, and she had done some eating disordered stuff, and she had some relationship issues, but she wasn't a substance abuser, but she was in a depression that was beyond belief. What she was a workaholic. She was 19 years old, and she was a workaholic. But the depression had taken over her, and she didn't know why. She didn't know why she was depressed. And so she came in, and we started giving her assignments to do. We didn't know what her depression was, but we were asking about it, and we do letters to self and that kind of thing, that you start to understand what's going on with people by asking them to write. And all of a sudden, she started having problems with food. And it wasn't an eating disorder. She was struggling with the texture of food, and so she was not eating. So we gave her Ensure so she wouldn't lose weight and she would be okay. And you can extrapolate where I'm going with that. But she started having memory. That whole idea of not being able to deal with texture in her mouth, she started having memory. And what she remembered was that her grandmother had molested her. And she did an enormous amount of work around it. She was a workaholic. We gave her assignments. She gave herself assignments. And then she came to me and she said, fine, now I know my grandmother molested me. What am I supposed to do with that? And I said, you know what? I don't know, but I suspect that somewhere in your gut, you know what comes next. And I said, maybe a letter or a collage, or I don't know. So I went to a conference, and when I came back, this was there. Coke can grandmother. And some of you have seen this before if you've seen my presentations. But this is just such an astounding example of the kind of work. And what she did was she had her group help her collect Coke cans. And baby's sitting in the lap. Now I used to be 5 feet. I'm only 4'8" now. But clearly this is bigger than I am by a lot. She had cleaned out every Coke can, and in each one she wrote a message, a negative message that she had received as a result of that abuse. And she put it in the can, and then on some of the cans she wrote things on the outside. And we called her Coke Can Grandma. Now, the reason that that's a big deal is that Mormons don't drink caffeine. And Grandma was not a good Mormon. She drank Coke and she smoked Pall Malls. And so there was a whole history around this particular Coke Can Grandma. So I was stunned and astounded. I said, "This is amazing. What do you want to do with this?" She said, we were on 52 acres in the middle of the forest and had golf carts. And she said, "I want to run her over with your golf cart." I had a yellow golf cart. I don't even like yellow, no. So she got her small group together, and they were cheering her on, and she ran Grandma over and over and over and over and over and over. And she cleaned up every can, and at the time I had 20 therapists, and she made 20 Coke can flowers and gave one to each therapist, and we still have them. And that was almost 10 years ago. And that is trauma resolution. That's trauma resolution. Now, I suspect that she'll be a Republican female president someday, because the next conference I went to, she called me and she said, "I've done some more work and I'd like to bring you to see it." And she had done a bunch of work. She did some stuff with mirrors and a shotgun, God help us. And she did she was giving herself assignments. And so it happened to be in Las Vegas, and she came up off the elevator and she had these boxes with her, like on a rolling thing. And I said, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Because I just had a small little exhibit over there. She said, I want to show you this. And I said, "But what is it?" She said, "It's Coke Can Family." Her therapist, my friend Craig, and her parents took her to see her grandparents, and she went to confront them. And they said absolutely not, they had not done it. She knew the truth. She got relief from that. And then from that, she went to a family reunion in Salt Lake, and her family was asking her, "Well, where have you been? You've been away for 3 months. Where have you been?" And she told them, "I went to treatment to do trauma work, and Grandma molested me, and I did the work around that." And one by one, her cousins came up. And this is a big Mormon family. Her cousins came up and said, "Me too, me too, me too." And Grandpa did it too. The validation for that young lady was powerful, really powerful. Was Grandma and Grandpa ever going to say the truth? No. But that family had tremendous healing around that, tremendous healing. And that's what trauma resolution looks like. And it comes in so many forms. This is a really grand form of resolution. So tell me a story, be a witness, hold space, and listen. When this young lady came to us, those are tattoos, those are not bruises. Now this is what I want you to hear. For those of you who are in recovery, she came to us with 14 years of recovery. She was an adopted child into a very wealthy family. Her brother was adopted. She was sexually abused as a child. Nobody ever would listen to her about it. She found recovery. She'd been in and out of mental institutions. And at the time, I had a house on a lake, and so we would have our clients come and we would do mandatory playtime because they don't know how to have fun. So you have to teach them how to have fun. So she was admitting that day, and so they brought her to my house, and the other therapist who brought her in said, "I think you probably need to sit with her," because we hadn't seen those tattoos. So I took her onto the beach, and we sat and we talked. And I just want to tell you, if you are working with clients who have tattoos, and I have one, mine has a story too, but ask them to tell you the story of their tattoos, because there are stories. There are really stories, and they're powerful. So I sat on the beach with her, and I said, can you tell me about those tattoos? And she said, I have been in so much pain for so much of my life, and I couldn't make people understand what was going on the inside. So I wanted them to know, and I put it on the outside. And those tattoos were, I mean, what you see and more. She was with us for about 5 or 6 months, and she moved to Ocala and went to a sober living. And one by one, as she got better, she started having those tattoos lasered off until this is what she is. And her name's Chloe. She's in the book. I can tell you that because she's given permission. And the power of this young lady. Life is not tremendous for her. She has a lot of physical pain. But I've never seen a woman with such faith and such trust in the process that she went through, and just a powerful woman in the rooms. Any questions about what I'm showing you? No? Okay. So me too. Hashtag me too. What I want you to know is that what self-soothing looks like. My son helps me with this. My son, the 3-year-old therapist, you know, he's now, God forbid, going to be 50 soon. But he helped me with this. So what you talking about, self-soothing? This is what we do to be able to soothe ourselves, okay? Suck our thumb, have a binky, have a dog. Trauma survivors are attracted to animals more than any other people in the world because they're safe, because they can be trusted. Today I will live in the moment unless it's unpleasant, in which case I will eat a cookie. Any cookie monsters in the room? These are the self-soothing behaviors. What are we going to use? Smoking. And then we have our children who start really early to get those self-soothing behaviors. One time I'm not very technical at all, and I had my iPhone and I was doing some game, and I'm not good at that kind of thing, and so I don't know what I was doing. And at the time he was 4. My grandson came over. They called me Yada. He said, "It's okay, Yada. I'll help you get up to the next level." I didn't know. He was 4. They knew better. But we have to be careful, because as wonderful as all of this technology is, it's also a place of soothing. Any of you do those games and things? You know, when you're not busy, or when you're busy and you don't want to be busy, or when you're on a plane, or however that looks? Yeah. All right. And then we have things like self-harm. It's really important. I hope you know this. Cutting is not about suicide. It's not about suicide. It's about relief. It's about release. And it's also about numbing. So it has both potentials. Both potentials. We don't discharge easily, and we certainly don't discharge for self-harming behaviors. The one time when I thought we might have to do that for a client, I called the only place in the United States who said that they work with self-harming behaviors. And I asked, okay, so what's your program? Well, we contract with the client. And I said, and what if they break the contract? Well, we discharge. I can do that. And the truth is, that's not what works. You know, there are reasons for that self-harm. It's because something came up. And there are things that we can do to help self-harmers do something different. And then, of course, there's gambling. And you don't have to tell me the truth, but pornography for anybody in the room? Okay, right, nobody. Okay. Naked pornography in the room? Thank you. Yeah, we're keeping secret keepers. All right, this is a story. This is a young man who was a cutter. He was also suicidal. His name is Zach. I can tell you that because he is the first story in the book. If you buy the book, please read his story, because He's a young man who was a really good athlete, very young, 7 or 8 years old. His coach started molesting him. And what he says in his story is that he felt desired. He's 7 or 8. Somebody's paying attention to him. Somebody's paying attention to him. And guess what? Our bodies betray us. If you're 7 or 8 years old, things start to feel good that shouldn't feel good, but they do. And one of the most difficult things when you're working with sexual abuse survivors is being able to walk through with them that pain that it felt good because they're blaming themselves. They are feeling guilt and remorse and shame that was their experience because they think it's their fault. Zach thought it was his fault. The wonderful thing about Zach is that this kid survived. He's about 24 now. He works for me. He's one of the best employees I've got. He had attempted suicide repeatedly as a result of that sexual abuse and what followed. Because what followed him as a result of his sexual abuse is sex addiction, his sex addiction. And it was humiliating and shaming, and he felt that he was worthless. He comes from a wonderful family who didn't know the sexual abuse was taking place. His father is a marine biologist who's out saving the coral reefs. And Zach is one of the only American who was Australian rugby, John? Rugby. So part of that was him. He would get bloody. He would like to hit people and be hit back because it reinforced for him all of that pain. Does that make any sense to anybody in here? Are any of you going, oh my God, that's so sick? No. Okay, good. So what Zach tells us is he woke up every single day believing, since he was 8 years old, a little boy with a great big secret, that it's a good day to die. Every single day, from 8 years old, he would wake up thinking it was a good day to die. And what happened for Zach is that he attempted suicide multiple times. He came to the treatment center that I owned initially. He was there 3 different times. The last time he was going to be discharged because he had self-harmed. And there were 2 really good therapists there who worked there and said, if you discharge him, we're both leaving. Because self-harming was progress. That was progress as opposed to being suicidal. And he was pretty serious when he attempted suicide. And somebody told Zach that those 2 therapists had stood up for him in staffing and said, if you discharge him, we're leaving. And there was such a shift for him. And his father had written a letter to him. His father was on Suicide Cliff in Okinawa. And that was where the Japanese had jumped off the cliff when it came time to surrender. Rather than surrender, they jumped off the cliff and committed suicide. And his father very tearfully wrote to Zach that it was so distressing to him to realize that he could lose his son at any moment, and that just like the Japanese jumping off the cliff, if they had just turned around and seen that on the other side that there was the bay and there was beauty. And that letter had a huge impact on Zach. And then not long after he discharged from treatment, he went and met his father at that cliff. And that day he did exactly what his father did, and he started crying. And he wrote to us on Facebook and told us that was the day I realized that it's a good day to live. And that every day since then, that's been the way for him. But it was about somebody staying and hanging in with him long enough for him to be able to recognize that he no longer had to self-harm and that he no longer had to attempt suicide. He's the kid. I call him a kid. He's this big galumpa kid. Everybody is to me. But he's the one that when a self-harming client comes in, I send Zach, go talk. He's got a whole lot more power than I've got with that client. I might be the therapist with initials after my name, but he's the young man with the experience. He's got the valid truth of what it is to be in that place and understand that kind of pain. So you're nobody until somebody loves you. I'm somebody, and that's what what happened for Zach. At 8 years old, somebody loved him. Doesn't mean his parents didn't love him. This coach loved him in a different way, obviously. So when we're talking about this kind of work, we're talking about the visceral, sensory, cellular. So learn, learn, learn. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn. And so if you're doing a Coke can grandma, or you're doing any number of experiential pieces, you're going to get this much more quickly than if I'm going to stand there and tell you and lecture you about why and how you can get better. How do we heal trauma? We heal at the visceral, sensory, cellular level through experiential therapy, somatic healing, and importantly, telling the story in many, many ways, and then most importantly, rewriting the story. So I know there are a lot of recovering people in this room. How many of you have rewritten your story? Yeah. What, just that whole group right there? Did you all go to treatment together? No. Yeah. The story I lived is different than the story I live today. So storytelling provides an opportunity to resolve feelings of guilt, remorse, shame, fear, victimization, and anger. It gives space to let go of secrets. It helps to dilute the power of life events, to understand the soothing coping behaviors and addictions, providing insight to create and heal their behaviors. It helps to understand and rewrite your story. So the story I have today is very different than the story I had. And that's the opportunity that we have. Isn't that what going into 12-step recovery is about? Is rewriting and taking your power and who am I now? Who am I now? That doesn't negate the story that I had. It means I have a chance to take from that story what is extraordinary about me and take it to a different place. There are many ways to tell our story, and these are some of them. So for instance, if you have people who have secrets and they can't tell the secret because somebody told them, if you tell, I'm going to burn your family in a house, or I'm going to kill your sister, or I'm going to go after your little sister instead of you. If you've got somebody that's holding those secrets because they're afraid of what might happen to them, we ask them to write a fairy tale, talking about the hero that they might need in their life. There are lots and lots of ways to do these things. This is a trauma egg. Anybody ever do a trauma egg? Good, 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 good. Okay, good. All right, so in a trauma egg, we're going to be talking about in utero, intergenerational trauma, because it all impacts who we are. We're going to start at the top with our motto, our unspoken family motto. If we don't talk about it, then it never happened. Anybody have that one? Yeah. If we don't talk about it, it never happened. And then we talk about the qualities, both positive and negative, about mom, dad, siblings. We're talking about grandparents, what was, family roles, what's your role in the family. And then what is really important is we're going to start putting these little scallops, and these are the traumas that we know. The negative things that happened to us in our life that impacted us, but they're pictographs. Anybody know why we do pictographs instead of words? Because that drives other people crazy. What do you mean? I'm not an artist. I can't do this. Well, can't I just write words? Anybody know why pictographs?
Is it because trauma sometimes doesn't go through language?
Right. Exactly. We're working with a different... I'm sorry?
Yeah, they cannot use language.
Yeah, and it works with different sides of our brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're back to the lizard brain, which is where the healing... Yeah. Okay, so with this man... It starts early with obviously with things that happened to him as a child. He was molested at age 5 by 2 cowboys. There's an enormous story. There were multiple fires over and over again, things that happened to him. His father had multiple sclerosis. Ultimately, he ends up with multiple sclerosis. That's the wheelchair and the cane. There's so many things in here. Multiple suicide attempts. Enormous, enormous trauma. This man came to us in a wheelchair with MS, with not a whole lot of hope that he was going to survive. And he came in and he did tremendous work, and he was with us for 5 months. He came 2 different times, not because he relapsed, but because he needed more work. And he did multiple things. So this is a trauma egg that tells a story in one way. This is a timeline that he did.
Wow.
He had no idea that he had any artistic skill. He found that while he was in treatment. And so he's telling the same story, but in a slightly different way. And as he's telling it, what has happened is he's begun to bring in the angels and the positive. So now he's looking at why are the reasons that I survived? Why did I survive? What about my experiences given me other talents, other skills? It's a beautiful piece of work. He's a therapist, incidentally.
Is he from Australia?
Pardon me?
I said, is he from Australia?
No, he's from Arkansas.
Okay, because of the kangaroo.
Yeah. He's got, those are the cowboys that,
And kangaroos.
n- kangaroo?
About the watch.
An angel.
That.
They're angels.
Not here.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. John, mark that down. I got to find out why. I never recognized that before. Wow.
Maybe he has some connection with Australia.
He may. He very well may. Okay.
And there is there's a little kangaroo on the couch.
Yes, you're right. You're right. I'm going to find out. I'll find out tonight. Yeah, and I'll post it. Okay?
Yeah,
All right.
I'm curious.
I'll find out. Okay. And then
Oh, wow.
he did 7 masks on his face, paper mache. Okay, these are 3 of them. So this is the one that's filled with pain. I can't eat. So he had, with everything else, he had eating disorder. He's a bisexual man in Arkansas, which, I don't know, those of you that aren't Americans, Arkansas is very southern. And his family was very, very narrow-minded and bigoted, so he was in big trouble. So this is with all of the pain. Over here is imagine all the people. This is the healing part, what's happening for him, facing our fears, and you see him with the jump shot of the basketball. It's just beautiful. And then here is his surrender, and the angel is carrying him. So here he was telling his story over and over in very many different ways, and each time the story got less ugly and more powerful about who he was as a human being. Now, the reason I have Me Too here is what's important is this Me Too movement that's happening all over the world, and certainly a big deal in the U.S. What I think is really important for us to know, especially as therapists, and to acknowledge is that the Me Too movement is not just about women, not by a long shot. There are a whole lot of men who have been abused and used and hurt in so many ways, and as I've been doing this work for 30 years, I have watched finally men come, more and more and more men come in and tell their stories and tell their abuse stories. And I would just invite you to be really open to hearing that, because I would bet that 80% of our men coming in have been sexually abused. They're in recovery, they're addicts, along with process addictions. And generally speaking, if you're seeing process addictions, I promise you, you better be looking at sexual addiction. But it's important for us to recognize that men are part of this Me Too movement. The other part of that is, how many of the perpetrators have also had experience in their life, and how do we handle that, and what do we do with it? Hopefully, we've been blessed to be able to work with an adolescent program that understands sexual abuse, sex addiction, and we've been able to help those young men early on before it becomes untenable, before it becomes the point at which they start getting labeled and they can get some help. So this is, if you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write "Me Too" as a reply to this tweet. If all the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote "Me Too" as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem. And again, I'm just going to say, I really embrace the possibility that our men can start standing up and hashtagging as well. We are not bad people trying to be good. We are wounded people trying to heal. So I work with a lot of families, and this particular family is a family from the town I live in. And their mom and dad are alcoholics, and they have 3 sons. And then they got divorced because of the alcoholism, and then mom got married again and had a daughter and another son. Of the 3 sons, one of them, the youngest one, had a girlfriend, and all 3 sons were dealing drugs because mom and dad were just out of control in their alcoholism. So they were all in the drug culture in our town. And the youngest son had a girlfriend, and they were in their apartment, and somebody came in and shot them, tried to kill them, killed the girl, and not the son. The family was devastated. The town was devastated. 2 years later, another girlfriend, same murderer, came in and killed both the new girlfriend and the son. So this family, again, the devastation is insane. And one by one, this family came to me and started to do the work. They got into recovery. Mom and dad both got into recovery. They're divorced, but they both have recovery. The 2 sons, one went to prison, got out of prison, got sober, clean and sober, and then the other son did the same. So, and they both married women who had gone through our program. So now they're all coming through our program, and we're doing family work together. All of them work now in the industry. But the point was that one by one they came, and each one did an intensive. I do 5-day intensives where I get anywhere between 12 and 20 people, and we do really intense work for 5 days. So one by one they each came, and they did all this grief work around the brother, the son that they lost. They did grief around the loss of the marriage. There was so much going on, but one by one they came. And then finally, after everybody had done their work, Dad hadn't done it. And Hannah, I didn't know. Hannah was the daughter, and she lived in Tampa. Let me back up. So Hannah, when she knew I was doing the book, called me and said, I have some poems I'd like for you to read, and if you would like them, you can put them in the book. So Hannah is the only one that I didn't work with, and this is her poem, and I want you to read it. She was the younger child, but this is what it was like for her growing up in that family. Learning how to breathe, I never thought it would be this hard. My lungs are dry, my lips are cracked. My throat aches with the screams I never allowed myself. My rib cage betrays me as I try to suck in the warm air that is supposed to give life to my frail organs. Even my tongue, a muscle I always deemed sharp and strong, lays flat and unmoving in my arid mouth, afraid to orate the fear of attaining knowledge so easily bestowed on others. How is it that I, a grown woman, has yet to know the feeling of taking a breath not saturated with rage? Starved of oxygen, that there is nothing I fear more than losing that pain. That pain has kept me alive. But what a life I have lived. No more. I brace myself, white-knuckled in this unfamiliar place, and I breathe. I breathe and cry like shards of glass are ripping apart my insides. I breathe my first real breath of change. I breathe through this new pain. And what Hannah is talking about is so powerful to me. There is nothing I fear more than losing that pain. And our trauma survivors coming in, that is exactly what most of them feel. I'm so afraid to give this up because I don't know what comes after this. And the truth is, trauma work is walking into a black dot, going into that pain, hopefully with a good therapist guiding you. being able to experience the pain that we have attempted to not feel, and being able to walk out through the other side. That fight, flight, and freeze that we do is all about not allowing ourselves to complete the process of feeling. And we fight it, and we medicate it, and we find ourselves in a place where we just don't want to face it. And the courage of this young lady, there is nothing that I fear more than losing that pain. That pain has kept me alive. And I think that if you can look at your clients in that way and recognize that for them, and for most of us, finally looking at the real pain, the pit of pain, can be overwhelming. But on the other side of it is something important and special. And I don't know about for any of you, but for me it was pretty darn glorious to get to the other side. Because I'm not that woman that I was. And I thank God for that. So this young lady took us to that place where I know that her brothers did not have the talent or the skill to write a poem like that. But they had some art. Now, the other person was Dad. Dad had been a realtor. He was a tremendous woodworker. And all of the family came to me and said, we're doing well, but we can't continue because Dad's stuck. I mean, he's really, really stuck. And I knew him well. He hadn't worked in a really long time. And they asked me if I would take him into an intensive. And I said, you know, sure, if he's willing to do it. So they went to him and they did an intervention on him and said, we need you to go to this intensive. And so when I do a 5-day intensive, I start out with the question, what would you like to have happen at the end of the week? Now, there was this wonderful young man from London who was in that group. And there's a reason I tell you that. And he's a young actor, and he was in that group. And so I asked that question, and Mike said, I have been on my sofa for 10 years. I would like to get off of my sofa. So as we're doing all of this great work, it's intense. They're writing letters, they're doing collages, they're doing trauma eggs. And Michael, who's the young English boy, says in this brilliant way, like the 4th day in, you know, mate, I think we ought to burn that sofa. And we happened to be on the lake. We went to his house. Everybody was there. The ex-wife, his girlfriend, all of his children, the grandbabies, everybody was there. The men from the group, and Mike. They pulled this sofa out, and he doused it with gasoline. And it's a shame because I have one that you can hear the crackling of the fire, but somehow I can't make that work. I'm not technical. In any case, that's what his group invited him to do. You know, he could write letters till the cows came in. It wasn't going to help. But he burned that sofa, and he's been off that sofa ever since. I mean, truly. Truly. And he's, you know, he's a wonderful man. But that whole family helped each other to heal. Now, I realize that you probably can't do this at your treatment center or your private practice. It's not an easy thing. And, you know, I have a tendency to break the rules. Don't tell anybody, but I do. But this was a real gift to be able to do that. Oh, I'm sorry, that's out of whack. That's Zach. It's a good day to live. Okay. So Fabio says that we have wishes. No more babies born with broken hearts. Cancer can be cured with chicken soup. Grandmas never live alone. All children experience love. Greed to be a thing of the past. Honesty to run rampant. All hearts to be filled with compassion, and everyone gets a second chance. And if you can help your clients to understand that they have a second chance, it's the biggest deal. Isn't that what 12-step is about? A second chance? I know it was for me. I can't speak to you. So me too, me too. Now I want to tell you about, I'm going to do this pretty quickly. The most important thing if you want to work for me, and incidentally, if anybody wants a job and wants to come to the U.S., we're looking for therapists. Yeah. But our therapist, everybody who works for me has to do their own work. Now that means you have to snot and cry and weep and wail. You know, you have to do everything that your clients do. We're going to teach you how to do this kind of therapy, and you're going to learn it by doing it yourself. And for most of us, you're going to get pissed at me, but a fourth and fifth step are just not enough oftentimes. It's a wonderful thing, but sometimes your sponsor can help you with that one big deal that changed your life. So this is about Cheryl, who, when she came to work for me, she already had 30 years in mental health hospitals in Gainesville, Florida. She also had 30 years in recovery. She's a big, wonderful, soft woman. And when she interviewed with me, I had treatment center with 50 beds, and it was a lot of hardcore trauma, a lot of self-harming behaviors and things that we, worked out. We do really good work. And so when she interviewed with me, I said, Cheryl, I know that you've got experience and it's wonderful, but I have a feeling that you're going to be a little too soft and these people will eat you up alive. And she said, please, I really want to try this. I think I can do this. And she talked about being a chameleon and what that was like in her life. I ended up hiring her, and at the time we had cottages on the property. She lived an hour from us, so she would come for her shift and work for 4 days, and sleep 4 nights on the property. We had a wonderful cabins where she could do groups, and she said that at night she would read Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine, and then she would cry and she would weep and wail because the work was so intense and there was so much going on. And you hear these stories every day, and you better have a place to put them. You better have a way to be able to walk through not just the pain of your clients, but how it affects you. So she talked about being a chameleon in her life. For much of my life, I had no real idea who I was. I distinctly remember walking around my various apartments and living spaces, studying the pictures on the walls, the furniture and objects on them, trying to see them through the eyes of others in order to see who I would appear to be. With people, I was whoever they wanted me to be. Like a chameleon, I would change myself to blend and fit in. Anybody else operate that way? I called myself, that was me, chameleon. Who do you want me to be? I could be it. Which man was it? I don't know. Do you like golf or you like football? Okay, I do. Yeah. And, and it's kind of what happens to us. So she would joke that she couldn't have a party because if she invited all her friends, she wouldn't know how to act because they would be different friends and she would act differently with them. So there's an image in the center of the collage of a figure walking away from a mask on the ground. So that's her walking away from the mask. And this is her chameleon collage, which I thought pretty stunning, the masks that we wear. And that's another art project that we have clients do, obviously. But this is the important part. Therapist, heal thyself. So rising from the ashes is about getting sober, finding a program of recovery. I was waking up out of a dark and despairing landscape, and at times I wanted to end my life. She had a journal entry that she found in 1997, 6 months before she stopped drinking. She's in her office. This day will never end. I'm sick, hungover, my body is poisoned, my brain is soaked. How long can I go on this way? I have to admit I'm an alcoholic. I have lost control over my drinking. I'm ashamed and embarrassed. And she's a therapist. And that was 30 years before she got to me. So I make sure that all my therapists are trained in a lot of different things. Brain spotting, EMDR, somatic experience, hypnotherapy, sex addiction, all those things. And so we were doing a training about somatic experience. And who got to see Peter Levine yesterday? If there's one thing that you need in your toolbox, it's somatic experience. If you're going to do trauma work, if there's one thing that you need, it's that. And so they were doing a somatic experience training, and the trainer asked for an inescapable assault, someone who had experienced an inescapable assault, and he needed a volunteer, and Cheryl volunteered. And he started taking her through the process of being able to, what was going on in your body now, what's going on in your body now, talking about it, what's going on in your body now. And all of a sudden, she started trembling and shaking, and a really long time. And then she started to scream, "I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive." She had been held prisoner by a couple of men who raped her and held her in an assault 30 years before that day. And she started screaming, "I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive," because her body believed that she was still in that assault. And there was such a shift and a change for her. And when we've done somatic experiencing with clients, we'll see people do that, shake and tremble for sometimes 30, 40 minutes as they're letting go and releasing all of that energy that's in their viscera. But for Cheryl to experience that. And so I really am looking for therapists, but you're going to have to do this stuff. And that's her Phoenix. So John West in the back is my business partner, and his fiance back there is Audra. I have to be careful that I don't just say partner, because people get really confused. And he's, young. But John and I opened the guest house 16 months ago, and we named it the guest house because of this poem, Rumi, which I absolutely love. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I believe this poem with all my heart. I have watched it in action. I watch people clearing out the yuck. And it's amazing what happens in their life, because things start coming in because you've emptied that place of the darkness. I jokingly say this, but it's true. I do these 5-day intensives, and people come to me who, haven't been able to get pregnant or doing IVF or, we have so many intensive babies now because they've done this work, they've cleared out, and all of a sudden they can get pregnant. It's the truth. I'm going to do research, but it's the truth. When we can clear out the yuck, other things can come into our life. And I know, thank you God, that that's what happened for me. When I was able to clear out all the yuck, the pain, the sadness, the sorrow, the horrors of what I had done, of who I was, when I cleared that out, I cannot begin to tell you this amazing, amazing life I've had since then. So thank you very much. I'm really grateful for this. Two things. We do have a book signing if you're interested.
If you go down the stairs outside where the registration is, Judy will be doing
Okay, I just need to tell me where to go and I do it. The other thing is I want to know if there are any questions or any responses. Anybody want to hit me in the head, or anybody want to debate? That happens on occasion. Yes, ma'am.
Judy, after the clients have been in treatment, do they come back for alumni work?
Yes.
Okay, and how often?
Actually, as often as they want to. And we keep, we are very much in contact with our alumni. We stay in close contact with them. We know what's going on, where they are, what's happening. That's one of the, there's a little bit of selfishness around that. I want to see that they're doing well. And so, change of plans, okay. But yes, and if you are working with folks, really grab onto your alumni. Number one, they're the best referral source you'll ever have. And number two, they deserve the continuing care. And you get to see the shifts and the changes, and that's really powerful. Anybody else? Anything?
I just want to say you're amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is Audra. She works for me. Can you stand up? We have this joke. I tell her she wears heels and of course looks stunning. And I tell her I write the paychecks, so she can't be wearing heels around me. So.
I haven't worn heels in like a year.
I know. Yeah. So thank you. Any other questions? Any other responses? No?
I wanted to ask a little bit about the
I'm an acupuncturist.
Oh, yes, we do.
Okay, so I don't primarily treat people with addiction, but through my jobs I get a lot of people with addiction, but more so a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
In the last year, I've been doing a lot of more story work, so getting people to, or being a presence to hear story and a place to like a resonance for them. But I get primarily within more established forms of treatment with addiction and trauma, everything, there's a real sort of displacement or a sort of incongruence between a more sort of embodied approach versus the head. And I guess the question is really how can you, because I don't get that sense at all with the work that you're doing.
It's my life's goal is to train. One of the things that I do is I have a training program, 5 modules, 5 days, over a period of a year. And it's selfish because I have these clients that I need to send to other therapists when they go home, and we need real trauma therapists out there. And so we do the training. But you're right. It's not the model that's been around. You know, the model that's been around is pretty didactic, a Hazelton model. And that's not all. There are lots of people out there doing work, but and doing trauma work. But you're right. One of the things we do is we train a lot of massage therapists, first responders, doctors, nurses, acupuncturists, because those are the folks who are seeing the embodiment of trauma. And it's important. It's important to know what's going on. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you're doing the work. Yeah. Yes, somebody. Sir.
I'm not a professional.
Can you stand up?
Yeah. I'm not a professional, but it's a question about forms of subtle abuse or subtle trauma that have gone on, which don't grab a headline, like, for example, not having been sexually abused or anything like that. You know, something that doesn't grab a headline. This happened to me, but it's the stuff that didn't happen.
Exactly.
And I'm asking, is there a space for that? Would you say a few words on that?
I will.
I wouldn't want you to, I'm sure it's a big topic, but just a few words on the stuff that's not detectable, the stuff that you think goes on, but you just don't know.
The most subtle is abandonment and neglect. If I were to ask how many of you have felt abandonment and neglect in your life, can you stand up? There's nothing more subtle than that, because it can look like you can be in the most wonderful family with lots of money and plenty of food, and all you have in your life is a nanny or someone. There are lots of things around that. What does bullying look like that people, you're right, subtle bullying, what is that? It's huge. How many of you have moved more than 5 times as a child? Raise your hand. Huge trauma. Huge trauma. You have to start over every time. So thank you. Great question. And there are all those subtle things. You're right.
Coercive control.
Pardon me?
Coercive control.
Yes.
Which now in the UK is acknowledged as abuse. But it wasn't for, like controlling what time or controlling over money. There's a lot of, now in the UK is a criminal offense. It's just since 2015. Controlling, for example, the husband or wife's money.
Yes.
Or controlling what time you come in, controlling of your phone, like not having any privacy. It's now more recognized.
There's so much more. One of the presentations, the original presentation that I do, describes all of those things. I have people stand up, sit down, about the number of things that you experience. People don't realize how much has happened to you in your life that constitutes trauma. And as those layers and layers and layers of trauma build, it only takes one tiny thing to just take you over the edge. And it will look subtle and it will look simple, but it's a result of everything else that's happened to you in your life. It's not just 9/11 or a shooting. We've got lots of school shootings. It's those things that build up over time, and that abandonment and neglect fits there. It's a little bit at a time, every single day, knowing that ultimately you amount to zero in the eyes of whoever is your caretaker. Whether that's, and it doesn't have to be malicious. It doesn't have to be malicious. It can just be because, that I was an alcoholic, addicted mother, loved my children, but I was unavailable. And I can own that. And I know how it impacted them. And that doesn't feel good to say, But the truth is, I'm a great grandma because now I figured it out. So that was a little more frivolous than I wanted it to be. But yes, thank you. And somebody else had their hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering about, you said about intergenerational trauma, cultural.
Yes.
Because I've been studying a little bit from slavery and handed
Yes.
down, and looking, my mother, she had mental health, but she was also very abusive, you know, and I could see how it was handed down. You can see films, the beatings we had, and it was quite severe, and the way it is, and I wonder if you deal with anything like that, because it really interests me how I can see from my grandfather how it's been handed down, the beatings, and then you can see how it's been handed down for slavery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's imperative. I mean, if you're doing trauma work, you better be getting a history.
Yeah.
You better be getting the intergenerational history.
Yeah.
That's the point at which finally I have people calling we'll be in an intensive and I'll have them do a trauma egg, and I'll say, now call your mother tonight and find out what was going on when she was pregnant with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Or what was going on with your grandfather or your grandmother, you know, to find out those things. All of a sudden, like the puzzle pieces fall into place.
So, yeah, cultural shock, isn't it? It's like cultural shock where
Yes.
I looked at, because my mum came here
Uh-huh.
from wherever she came, whatever happened to her. She already had 6 children by the time she got here, then come into a different country, and then how it was sort of handed down to me.
Yeah.
And I've just looked at my brother. My brother went one way. I was speaking to someone. He went, so he hanged around with just black people. I hanged around with white people because I wanted to adapt and change, just from the perception that our mother gave me.
Exactly.
I sort of realised I got rid of a lot of my culture in a sense because I thought I want to fit in,
Right.
but then got into addiction and all the stuff we talked about.
And
the
that's
impact.
that's why things like 23andMe and Ancestry.com are so powerful now. People are looking. Lots of secrets are coming back out of those things, though. I just found out that I have a nephew. I had no idea. My sister gave up a child when she was, you know, I didn't know. This year, I found out. All these years later, you know. So, but it's, let me know who I am. And I am a whole lot more than just this person that's sitting here. You know, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandfather, Patty Creedon, who's sitting behind you. We went to Belfast, which is where my Irish family's from. And boy, did I learn a lot from just being there and being able to put the pieces together. I only had little pieces, and now I have big pieces. And yes, it makes a difference.
It's maybe like, what's his name? Mornay, Alistair Mornay, who had lectured before you.
Oh, I
downstairs?
didn't see him, no.
No, but he was talking about you have to start with culture and the society
Yes,
when you're healing people. And
Yeah.
I think he's totally right.
Totally
It's
right.
Just what you were saying
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
It seems crazy that, like, as a culture we wander around with this mask of like acceptability and normality.
okay,
And really, like, we're just, I think it's Jamie Cato, we're all sort of, you know, hidden geniuses.
Yes.
Like emotional geniuses being controlled by psychopaths.
I like that. Yeah, true. It's true. There's so much that we don't know about ourselves because we don't know enough about our past. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask the sort of age range that
Uh-huh.
you work with. I mean, how young, how old? Is there a restriction or limit?
In our treatment center, it's 18 to whatever. But we work with the families. We can work with very young children. Betty Ford has a wonderful program that some of the children that we're working with just went there to do with Jerry Moe. He does this beautiful piece of work for 4 days. It's just the kids and him. And he talks about guilt and shame and mommy and daddy and what addiction looks like and what codependency looks like. And they start making boundaries, and they're 7 and 8 and 9 years old. So, you know, kids know. They don't know what they know, but they know. They know energy. They know energy. And, you know, and for us, growing up, we knew stuff was going on. We might not have known what, but, you know, we feel that energy, and sometimes we try to, you know, deny it. But it's there. Sir?
I was asking, just sort of starting out in the field, and there's a theme in this conference, and that I've picked up on in the last few months about trauma and addiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a background thing. You know, is there, other than your book, is there literature that you would direct a student towards? And because obviously this is something that I'm going to need to seek some kind of training in the future,
Mm-hmm.
as a student, that's out of my price range, bluntly. So, is there literature that you would direct students towards?
We can start with Patrick Carnes, A Betrayal Bond and Out of the Shadows. Betrayal Bond is one of the most amazing books. Betrayal Bond. And Out of the Shadows is the very first real sex addiction book that came out, with Patrick talking about his own sex addiction. Gabor Mate, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Peter Levine, Waking the Tiger. Anything of Peter Levine's. He's written so much. There's so many people. Claudia Black. Pardon me? The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. If you get my book, there are lots of books in the back. There's resources. Was that good? Yeah? I think we have to close now. Thank you so very much. I'm so excited. I love coming here. You all, sometimes, how many Americans are in the room? Sometimes my community over there can get a little blasé, but I love that, you all are like right on target. Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.